be your best advice to teachers of very young learners?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's also a very difficult one, the very, very best. But I think I would say to actually keep in mind 3 paradoxes, if you like, in everything you do. And the first one is, the more global your approach, the more language children learn. We need to take account of the fact that children learn in a global way, that language is just one element in the overall context from which children make sense of the world and construct personally significant meaning. When working with young children, English cannot be seen as an end in itself. It has to be seen in the context of children's overall psychological, emotional, social, cognitive, physical, creative, and of course, language development. And paradoxically, it is through taking a global approach and attending to the developmental needs of the whole child that they actually learn more English than in a more narrowly focused language-driven approach. And this is because learning becomes part of real social events in the classroom with expectations, intentions, purposes, and negotiated meaning using discourse skills as well as vocabulary that naturally promote interaction and communication skills. And with children using all the languages they have available, but increasingly, of course, English. The second paradox is the more control, the greater the freedom. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm definitely not talking about authoritarian control here, but control in the sense of setting up a carefully demarcated learning framework. Children need to know and have a right to know what we expect of them and what we want them to do. And paradoxically, by establishing very clearly defined parameters for learning, in other words, the control, we actually create space for a huge amount of freedom. Freedom for the children to feel secure, to act autonomously, and to develop and grow and learn, if you like, to blossom at their own pace in a safe environment. Freedom also for them to engage in lively, multisensory and creative activities, and freedom for us as teachers to use more child-centered activities and manage their learning in a positive way. Now, we can establish a learning framework through thinking about 4 key components. Time, in other words, the pattern and organization of our lesson sequence, what we do when, and taking into account children's very short attention span. The second component, the space, the learning environment, where we are when we do certain activities on the carpet, at our tables, and moving from one place to another. Routines, the security of knowing what's coming and how you're expected to behave. And the fourth component is to do with activity patterns. And what I mean by this is patterns that children become familiar with for practicing different language and vocabulary. For example, a simple dance game, which may have music and then you pause the music and say, touch something orange or touch your toes. And children get used to doing the activity to practice different language. And all 4 of these components create an interlinked set of implicit parameters or boundaries within which children's development and learning take place. And of course, I describe this in quite a lot of detail in the book. And the third paradox I would mention that we really need to keep in mind is that the more you lead as a teacher, especially at first, the more child-centered learning becomes. And here, I mean leading in the sense of providing a clear, motivating, and enthusiastic model, promoting self-esteem through feedback and praise, and using routines and classroom activities with appropriate scaffolding and support to allow the internalization of learning to take place. And at first, the teacher leads and guides the children through a series of relevant behaviours, and then gradually steps back as children become increasingly capable of acting competently and confidently on their own. And I'm sure you probably recognise here, there's a reference to Bruner's handover principle. The teacher steps back and children increasingly do more in an independent way.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. And I think the what you mentioned at the beginning of that, of student, it's not just about learning English, it's about everything else around it, is such a important point when teaching everyone, but especially very young learners.
Exactly.